My name is Nick Floyd. I have a long history with Magic the Gathering. I created the Dandan variant. Now I'm creating this. Welcome to Magic Storytime. Today's trivia question is, in the mid-1990s continuing to 1999, a series of 6x9 oversized Magic cards were produced. Wizards of the Coast published many of these as prizes for their in-store Arena League prizes. This was decades before the Magic the Gathering Arena online game, and the name similarities are just for lack of creativity. The first in this series of oversized cards was published by Inquest magazine and available as a free promo in issue 12, April 1996. The trivia question is, what was the card Inquest printed at this size? Hint, the card they used and its massive size were part of a joke, and the fact that it was in the April issue was probably not a coincidence. Stay to the end of the video for the answer. This is episode 10, my run at US Nationals, July 1997, Part 2. After day 1 of Nationals, I still didn't have a deck for the Type 2 standard portion the following day. That evening I had no idea what I would be playing. What was I going to play? Ivan and I went to our hotel to figure out what the hell I was going to play. We tried a bunch of different things and nothing was working. Whatever Ivan played against me was beating. We would switch decks and he would win again. Nothing was working for me. I wasn't feeling it and it was getting late. My advice, don't do this. I do it again in the Magic story for another time. But don't do what I did. Find your deck and practice beforehand. Ivan had played in the Meat Grinders the day before, and he had some info about the meta. He told me about his experience and about abeyance. Since Weatherlight had been released, we had not noticed this broken rare. It had been printed with bad wording and had not been ruled or eroded correct to not affect mana abilities, so it shut down the tapping of lands for mana. It was basically a time walk if cast during your opponent's upkeep and they had no responses and no attack. It had totally gone unnoticed by the bad boys, but Ivan had been seeing it played in Counterpost deck. Counterpost was a blue-white control deck that used Kojorn Outpost as its win cone, a full contingent of counterspells, and 4 copies of Abeyance. Like I said, nobody paid attention to Abeyance. We considered it a junk rare. I had none. Earlier in the weekend when Ivan told me about Abeyance and how broken it was, he leaned over to me and whispered, I checked our binders. We have 4. These were the binders that he had brought with him from some of the other bad boys so that Ivan could build decks for the Meat Grinders. As late as it was, we had time to build one more deck. Ivan said, let me build you Counterpost. Okay, I said. Ivan didn't know a complete deck list, but he had seen the deck. He knew that future Hall of Fame player John Finkel was running a version with Brainstorm and Impulse called Finkel Post. Well, we couldn't find what to cut for playsets of those cards, so they were left out, and that was significant to one of my wins, which I will get to. I know I had some input into the deck and sideboard. Anyway, Ivan and I played one game in which I played Counterpost. I don't remember what Ivan played, but I remember I lost to whatever it was. But it was late and I said to Ivan, this is what I'm playing, I know how to play it, I need to get some sleep. That's it. Only a few hours before my standard Nationals event, and I had finally had a deck. Was it going to be like the first draft today? Nope, more like the second draft. I won, and I just kept winning. In the 4th or 5th round, I faced another Counterpost deck, a mirror match. This would be a test of control skill. Yeah, this might go to time. I don't remember my opponent's name, but I do remember that he came off as close to my age, around 18, within a year or two either side. It became obvious from the start that he was running the Finkel Post version of the deck, with Brainstorms and Impulse. The Counterpost decks at the time ran a single copy of Soldebi Digger, to put cards back into the library and avoid decking. Mine was no exception. I assumed his wasn't either. We both got a pair of Kojorn Outposts and were blocking each other's soldier tokens, and neither of us was making any headway. At one point, I tried to play my Soldebi Digger, and my opponent countered it or disenchanted it. So I'm looking at this stalemate and thinking, he's still has his Soul Debbie Digger in his deck, and mine is gone. He's running Brainstorm and Impulse, so he will have fewer cards in his library overall. All I have to do is kill his Digger when it shows up, and he'll deck out first. So I started collecting the right cards. I know there will be a counter war, so that's important. And then I also need Disenchant to kill it if I lose the counter battle. So I had a pair of Disenchant and a bunch of counter spells when he tried to play his Digger. He did win the counter war, and the Digger made it in play, but he couldn't counter the Disenchant once I untapped. Knowing he had fewer cards in his deck and the board was a stall, he conceded the first game to try and win the next two. We sideboarded and began game 2. I had sideboarded out all 3 of my Killjourn outposts, my only win con, because I expected he sideboarded in Political Trickery, which is what I sideboarded. That and I think Helm of Obedience to help me mill if that was an option again. Pretty sure he wouldn't have any creatures to hit. During the game, he played Killjourn outposts pretty early. Good, because my Political Trickeries necessitated him still playing them after sideboarding. The soldier tokens did some damage. I wrapped the gods and kept their numbers small. Kinda looked like I was struggling, which was important because at one point, I cast an Abeyance during my own main phase and shrugged my shoulders with a look on my face. Like I was just trying to draw a card off the cantrip. Made sure he was okay to let it resolve. Then I revealed what I was actually doing. With the Abeyance shielding me from counterspells, I activated my Thine Glaciers and cast Political Trickery, trading my Glaciers, which would return to my hand at the end of the turn, for his Killjourn outpost. Oh, he didn't take that well. It was indeed trickery, and he hadn't seen it coming. One of the best bluffs of my Magic career. But the tables had turned, and my own soldier tokens from his stolen outpost started to even things out. He eventually got a second outpost, and the game became a stalemate again. But I knew all I had to do was run out the clock to get the match win. I didn't stall or anything, but 2 slow control decks were just like 2 walls pushing against each other. It was a well-played match, but my strategies both games won me the match. My second to last match was against a player by the name of Kyle Bigos. Kyle had brought a 4-colored black deck to Nationals, which had a bunch of knights in it, a take on the 12 knight deck. But unlike regionals, I was ill prepared for a heavy knight deck and didn't put Knights of the Mist in my sideboard. Kyle was obviously a very good player to play at the level we were playing at. I guess since we were both playing for top 8 spots, Wizards was going to record our match. The cameras came out, and I had to play part of the match with a camera on the table pointed at me. I don't remember being really intimidated or distracted by the cameras, but I definitely remember them being there. Our games were somewhat similar to my games against the 12 knight deck at Mountain Regional, but I could not hold out this time. In our last game, he got me down to 1 life before casting Keravik's Spite while I was tapped out. I had Force of Will on my hand too, just like at Regionals, but this time I had 1 life instead of 2. I remember congratulating Kyle on the win, and showing him the Force of Will, pointing out I didn't have the life to cast it. I told him my Regionals opponent did it when I was at 2 life. He said he wouldn't have risked it if I had 2 life. Anyway, Kyle was cool and legitimately beat me. I figured I'd be rooting for him in the finals if I didn't make it. My last match was against Justin Gary. Justin has since become a game designer, entrepreneur, and host of the Think Like a Gamer podcast and website, link in the description. At USNationalsJuly1997, Justin was playing a fairly unique counter burn deck with some aggressive and hard-to-kill creatures, curated for the meta. Vernatic Efreet, Rainbow Efreet, Wildfire Emissary. He was also running 4 Mana War and Earthquake. His was a great deck to give fits to counterpost, Black Knights, and anything else in the meta. We only went 2 games, but they were both tough games. The first game went long as we were both playing a version of Control. For the second game, I figured his deck was slow, Control, and I had not seen many creatures, so I went into the mill mode, boarding in my Helms of Obedience. The second game was also a Control mirror slog. I did late in the game get a Helm of Obedience in play, but it hit a Wildfire Emissary, which I hadn't yet seen. Anyway, because he had won the first game, he got the match win. I figured I'd be rooting for Justin and Kyle in the next day's finals. After my Nationals bid had run its ground, I played the Dandan deck with Ivan. We must have played 30 games that weekend, both at empty tables at the convention halls and in the hotel room. We probably played Dandan late that night because we didn't wake the next day in time to watch the final 8. By the time we made it to the convention hall the next day, the final match was taking place. The two players playing were Kyle Bigos and Justin Gary. My two losses in the Type 2 portion of the weekend. Two players I said I would be rooting for. No matter who ended up on top, the winner and the runner-up of US Nationals was going to be the two players who had beaten me and put me out of the tournament. That felt pretty good. Justin Gary ended up defeating Kyle Bigos, and Justin became the 1997 US National Champion. Later I found out my overall standing in the tournament was 18 out of 180 invitees. Not bad for my first big tournament. It ended up being my only big Magic tournament, as college was the path my life was on. But I could play Magic in college and who knows, maybe make the pros. But that's a Magic story for another time. Today's trivia question is, in the mid-1990s continuing to 1999, a series of 6x9 oversized Magic cards were produced. Wizards of the Coast published many of these as prizes for their in-store Arena League prizes. This was decades before the Magic the Gathering Arena online game, and the name similarities are just for lack of creativity. The first in this series of oversized cards was published by Inquest magazine and available as a free promo in issue 12, April 1996. The trivia question is, what was the card Inquest printed at this size? Hint, the card they used and its massive size were part of a joke, and the fact that it was in the April issue was probably not a coincidence. Answer. The first 6x9 oversized card printed and available as a free promo in Inquest magazine in issue 12 in April 1996 was Chaos Orb. The joke being that a giant Chaos Orb dropped onto the playing area would cover more space and touch and destroy more regular sized Magic cards. This gag is probably why they chose the April issue. I bought that issue in 96 of course, and the giant Chaos Orb was such a hit with players. Many other giant cards were produced as prizes and promos over the next 4 years, including basic lands. I won, traded for, and was given many of these giant cards. So many that I was able to build a 40-card giant deck in red, black, and white, with a number of unused green and blue spells and lands sitting out. I've played it as a humorous lark many times, and it wins frequently. Of course, the giant Black Lotus and playset of Juzum Jin do help. This won't be my only mention of Juzum Jin. I owned a real one at one time, and the way I obtained it is a good story, and a Magic story for another time. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and leave a comment. See you next time on Magic Storytime.